Hello friends, welcome back to part 15 of my Tesla 2022 Q3 forecast, earnings forecast review video series. Tough to get the name of that thing right every single time. It's a long title for what I'm doing here, but I'm just going over my forecast and talking about it. That's probably an easier way of saying it, but so in the previous video we went through the income statement. One quick programming note for those of you who have been trying to follow along with the forecast thread that I tweeted on Twitter, which was originally intended to be a 30-tweet thread, and then a couple of events happened immediately after I tweeted it, which tacked on a 31 of 30 and a 32 of 30 to that thread. You probably are pretty lost after part 9 of this video. You were, able to follow along in order. I didn't miss anything. I talked about every one of those first 17 tweets over the first 9 parts of this video series. And then I did talk about it some, that I was going to have to change formats, but I didn't note that the very next tweet in the thread jumps right to the income statement. So there's all the charts, all the pretty charts that I let off that thread with, and the first thing I hit you with after that, that's just a big table of numbers, black font on a white background, was the income statement. So in parts 10, 11, 12, and 13, I was covering material you didn't have a visual for apart from, what I was sharing in the video. That's because I don't tweet out all of that detail every time. I used to tweet out 69 tweet forecast threads, and those take about 4 or 5 hours to tweet out. I mean, it is an ordeal to put out a 69 tweet thread, as you might imagine. Probably very few people in my viewing audience have ever attempted to post a 69 tweet thread. But if you need a visual image for every one of those, and you need to describe it and say something that's maybe more helpful to people than what you said the last time you tweeted out that thread, it takes a while to do. So without further ado, I will go back to my desktop. And this is where we left off at the end of part 14. We covered the income statement down to the GAAP earnings line. And so this is that first table of numbers that you see in my forecast thread on Twitter. And these rows are also included at the bottom of that slide. I went back to Twitter and looked, and they're there. So what are these doing? These are the number of shares outstanding and the earnings per share relative to this GAAP net income line that we have here. So why does Tesla report their income statement totaling up to GAAP net income instead of non-GAAP? Because the reporting requirements of the SEC require it. If you put out an income statement, it has to add up to the GAAP net income number at the bottom. What's the difference between GAAP and non-GAAP? It's the stock-based compensation. So stock-based compensation is not a cash expense. Tesla doesn't have to actually pay out cash to pay off that expense. What they're doing is they're creating brand new baby shares of Tesla to give to employees or board members as part of their compensation package, so that Tesla doesn't have to pay them cash only for their services, right? So your on your GAAP net income number, the stock-based compensation expense has already come out of it as though you had paid it in cash. But then there's also a non-GAAP earnings number that says, hey, we didn't actually have to pay any money for that stock-based compensation. It was just equity dilution to create new shares of stock to give to those people. So that's the difference between GAAP and non-GAAP. So the first number that we have is GAAP to talk about. We'll get to non-GAAP in a future video, probably. But what I want to talk about here are the difference between these. So we have basic shares outstanding and we have diluted shares outstanding. And my note here says the difference is stock-based awards, convertible notes, and warrants. So the basic number is telling you how many shares there already are outstanding, and the diluted number is telling you how many shares there are at risk of being created as of the reporting date. So the stock-based awards, like for Elon's stock-based compensation, that was one of the big differences between these, was, hey, if he earns all of these tranches under his stock compensation plan, then we're going to have to create a lot of new shares, and they will become basic shares when those shares vest, right? So that's one of the big differences between these numbers. Now, the other thing that I want to talk about on these, you can see, we're at Q2 2022, and I'm showing 3.112 billion basic shares outstanding, 3.466 diluted shares outstanding. Those are actually adjusted for the 3-for-1 stock split that happened during this quarter, as are all of the other quarters on this page. If you're going to adjust for a stock split, you need to adjust all time periods for it. And what you can see if you look in these formulas is that I'm actually stating everything in terms of the original shares outstanding for this company, and then multiplying it by 5 for the 5-for-1 stock split that happened August 31st of 2020, and then multiplying it by 3 for the 3-for-1 stock split that happened August 26th, 25th of this year, 2022. So that's what's going on here. And that's what these share counts are. And then what are we using this information for? We're using it to show the GAAP earnings per share, basic and diluted. So the earnings per share basic are more than the earnings per share diluted because you're dividing them into a smaller number. So it's a little heavier in the numerator. Or the numerator is the same, but the denominator changes. All right, you get the idea. You know how fractions work. I was never any good at math. All right, so those are the earnings per share numbers, and that's probably a good enough place to stop with part 15 and say, if you have enjoyed today's video, click the like button. If you're not subscribed to my channel already, you could subscribe to my channel. And I will see you in part 16.